Hello, hello everyone, and welcome. What an exceptionally exciting evening to be joined by the Dr. Jamie Goode. I hope you're all well today. Just patch him in and welcome everybody to our Monday Night Live with Mr. Goode.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Goode.
Nice one. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Keeping it real?
You've got something on your chin.
Really?
Oh, it's here. It's here. Are you growing a beard?
No, I just don't shave it.
It's become awfully relaxed, has it?
Yeah. You know what I'm like.
Welcome. Lovely to have you on Specialist Sellers Instagram Live this evening. I didn't even get to do the Jamie Goode spiel before you clambered onto the screen. So,
sorry.
I don't even need to give you any kind of introduction, really. You are the Mr. Natural Wine Guru. You're a scientist. You've got a PhD in what? Plant biology, something like that. You know, you're quite talented, really, aren't you?
No.
Yes. Yes.
No, me.
Oh, modesty. Modesty, modesty. So you also do a little bit of writing, is that right?
Yeah, occasionally, yeah.
Yeah? Quite a lot at the moment.
Yeah.
Let's go back a few steps, I think. Let's go back to how Jamie Goode first got into wine, because, you know, we've been over this story personally because, as most of you know, Jamie Goode and I are exceptionally good friends, aren't we, Jamie? We've travelled the world together on many occasions, and we've created many a havoc at many of an event, but we've had great fun in doing so. But tell us a little bit about how you felt, because you're a scientist, you studied, and then you started writing books, and then how did you fall into this wine writing world?
Yeah, no, it's looking back, it does seem a very journey. I am really good with the wine habits.
Really good with the wine habit. So you're really good at drinking.
No, so I was look, it was mid-90s.
Hey, the thingy's stop going in and out. Your reception's bad. Can you move?
No, I can do something about it. Yeah.
Do something about it. Just one moment, everyone, whilst Jamie Goode actually gets proper Wi-Fi. Here he is. He's back. I can hear him. Is that better? Hello. I can hear you properly now.
It was making some weird noises earlier.
What was that?
Is it garbling?
It was garbling a little bit, and now we can hear the dogs. Anyway, getting back to how Jamie Goode got into this wine world, and then more importantly, how you channeled your way into the natural wine world, because that's what we all want to know.
Right. So I did my PhD. You know, when I was at university, it was just we got proper sound still.
Yeah, I still can't hear you properly. You're going to have to move.
Shall I get headphones?
Well, it's just cutting in and out, but keep trying. Keep trying.
Yeah, because I've got a good signal.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, I'm hearing myself coming back. Yeah, really off-putting.
Well, it's repeating on me. Can you not move inside?
Yeah, I can do that.
Everybody hold the line. We just need to get a clear vision of Jamie, because nobody wants to listen to us repeat on ourselves all night. I'll just sip on some New Zealand Sauvignon whilst I wait for you.
Yeah.
Tell us your favourite wine while he sorts himself out. Hi, everyone. So I've had a question. What's my favourite wine? It's a very good question. Can I choose my favourite varietal at the moment? I am on a Chardonnay bandwagon at the moment, particularly New Zealand Chardonnay. It's a wine that is growing very, very exceptionally well throughout New Zealand. And I'm really, really enjoying the regional differences with New Zealand Chardonnay, from Central Otago to Martinborough. It is very, very exciting to see the different styles, but then equally, New Zealand itself, I think, is curating an exceptional style of Chardonnay, and some of the Chardonnays are becoming very well renowned and are channeling some of the old world counterparts around the world. So I think my favorite wine, one of my favorite producers of New Zealand Chardonnay has to be Newdorf, but equally there is a producer that I don't think anybody has, and one that I've spoken about quite regularly, Black Estate from North Canterbury. North Canterbury is an exceptional wine region, lots of limestone soils, so not dissimilar, but similar to Burgundy, and are producing just exceptional examples of Chardonnay. Do you agree with me, Jamie Goode?
I do, yes. Is that better?
Oh, good. Yeah, that's better. What happened?
Well, sometimes I had this the other night when I was doing a live, and putting headphones in made a huge difference.
Oh, okay. Hi, welcome back. Let's start that again. Everybody, Jamie Goode, author, wine writer, judge, all-round amazing natural wine guru. And I know tonight we're tasting a couple of wines that I've coerced Jamie into tasting with me. And although they're not natural per se, we're going to start by talking about Jamie's introduction to natural wine and how he got here. And then we're going to talk a little bit about natural wine, and then we're going to talk about New Zealand Sauvignon, obviously, because that's a very dear, great, close to both of our hearts, isn't it, Jamie?
Okay.
And then we're going to swiftly move to talk about some chemical compounds and stuff. So let's start with natural wine, Mr. Goode. How did you get here?
No, so as I tried to start off saying earlier on, I began by is your volume on high?
No. Why is it my fault now? Holy moly. Okay. Is that better? I've turned it down.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good now?
We're good.
Okay. Thank God. It's beginning to get painful.
Yeah, it's really painful. So I began by drinking wine at university, and it was like I didn't have any real appreciation of wine. And then suddenly there was sort of a few eureka moments, epiphanies, where I experienced wine. I thought, this is kind of interesting. This is like, I can still appreciate wine on the very basic level of the fact that it's a drink and it's sociable and it has alcohol in it. But also, I think I went through those moments where I suddenly thought, yeah, I'm really into this. This is really cool. How cool is wine? All the stories, all the the different places that make it, all the complexity. I was really into that. It was kind of cool. And so I started going on this is like around the time the internet began as well. So
which was about when? Just refresh our memories for those of us who don't know. Okay,
96
right.
or so, I got an internet account because I was working as a science editor. I did my PhD. I started working as a science editor. I was doing geeky academic science books. And so I went on these internet wine boards where people were like super into wine and were discussing wine. And it was like, whoa, it was really kind of cool because you got to talk about wine with people who knew so much. And like there were real experts and professionals on these forums, and it was kind of the early days of the internet. So it's a bit hobbyish. And so I thought, do you know what I'll do? I'll start, my work trips. I remember going to Australia in March 96, and took my wife at the time, Fiona, because you could take a partner if you wanted to. And we had a meeting out in Melbourne. And after that, we hired a car. And because we were kind of poor, we bought some sleeping bags, and we decided to travel up the coast, staying in on-site caravans, which is a cool way of actually, seeing Australia. And then we ended up in the Barossa Valley. And so my first winery visit was in the Barossa Valley in Australia. And I got to know wine, not through the classical route of you know, the famous French wines. I didn't do all that. I went straight to the New World. I went straight to Australia and then New Zealand and places where they used the name of the grape variety on the label. It made so much sense.
It does make so much sense to read and understand wines in this way. And did you then, after you became informed and understood from a New World perspective, then did you go back to the Old World and do your research this way as well? Or
yeah, but it was less accessible because at the time that the New World wines were quite affordable. They're quite cheap. I could afford them. But the Old World classics wine, they weren't the crazy prices they are today. They were still a little bit more expensive. So it took a while to go back to the Old World. But I had to, you know, I had to learn. I was a geek. And this latent geekiness had been awakened. So I was like, yo.
And so when this geekiness awakened, was it immediately towards natural wine, or was there a succession?
No. Natural wine didn't exist then. Natural wine didn't exist.
So
it sort of existed, but in a tiny niche. So
yes.
So basically what I did is I started a hobby website. And this is these days of Netscape and all this. You probably don't remember this because you're too young. But it was a hobby website, and and then I started doing these like consumer tastings. I didn't know much, but it's like sometimes the people who are best teachers aren't the people who are right at the top, but the people who are like 2 steps ahead of you. Because what they can do is they know how difficult. So I knew how difficult it was to learn about wine. It's kind of complex, so people would say, "Can you do a wine tasting for us?" So I'd buy like 6 bottles of wine, and we'd sit there and drink them and talk about them. And at one of these, down near my brother's in Southampton, what I remember is a woman said to me, "Do you know what you are?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "You're a wine anorak." So I thought, do you know what? That's a really good name for a website. So I went and got the domain name, and I started out Wine Anorak. And so it was horrible. It was like a hobby website. That's what people would do then. We didn't realize how big the internet would grow. So that's how I started out. And so a long story cut short, basically I just started a hobby website, and then I thought, maybe I can get some writing commissions because I know a bit about wine. It's like I was so naive and stupid, but I was confident. And so it's a great combination of naivety and confidence. You just got to do it, man. You've got to do it. Sometimes you just have to take a step.
So for the wonderful followers of Specialist Sellers and the people that are watching today, explain to us what natural wine is.
All right, yeah, so natural wine. So I got into natural wine probably in around about 2003, 2004, because it was just starting out then. And it had started out in the late 80s in a place called Beaujolais in France, in the south center of France. So Beaujolais was a region that basically was making, was in a rut. It was making cheap wines and marketing itself by its cheapest wines, and they weren't so good. So the price went down, and they had to cut more corners in the vineyards of the cellars. And it was, but in the mid 80s, there's a famous guy who's regarded as the father of natural wine, a guy called Jules Chauvet, and he mentored a few producers there. And he was a scientist. He was not like a hippie or anything. He was a scientist. He just thought, can we make wine without adding anything to it? So I must say, most wine I think is pretty natural. Wine is like, there are strict rules for how you make wine. So most wine is pretty natural, right? It's not chemical, it's not horrible. It's still good for you, and it's nice. But there are a lot of things you're allowed to add to wine as a winemaker. And so what happened in Beaujolais was that a few winemakers thought, what would happen if we didn't add any of these things to wine? How can we make wine without adding anything at all? And the answer is it's quite easy to let go of a lot of the additives, and I think most really good winemakers don't put much stuff into their wine. But the last thing that was hardest to get rid of is a compound called sulfur dioxide, which kills all the microbes, and it stops the wine oxidizing. And it's pretty universally used in winemaking.
In some way, shape, or form.
Yes. And it's not a bad thing at all. It's not bad for your health, the levels that it's added to wine. But these guys were like, how can we make it without anything added at all? And so they experimented, and they started making wines. And suddenly, a movement started. It was an unofficial movement, but it's producers who basically wanted to strip away all the makeup from their wines. So they want to make wines without makeup, just naturally made wines, which they believed expressed the place the best. So this idea in wine is that wines come from a certain place, and we kind of like them to taste of that place. And so natural wine is wine where there's no strict unofficial definition, but if there was one to be made, I'd say it's wine where you make the wine without adding anything at all. You should start off with well-farmed grapes, which usually means organically or biodynamically farmed grapes.
But a natural wine doesn't need to be organic or biodynamic to be classified as natural. Is that correct?
Well, generally, it's frowned upon if the grapes aren't organic or biodynamic. But
there's no actual law.
There's no law about natural wine. There's a recent initiative in France to try and codify natural wine, but it's like most of the natural wine guys are kind of like pretty hippie-ish and anarchistic, and they don't like to be told what to do. So I don't think they're going to sign up for any charter anytime soon.
No. Do you think it would help from a consumer perspective? Because I know there's a lot of confusion around natural, vegan, organic, and biodynamics from a consumer awareness point of view. Do you think having those parameters and the ability to communicate that more freely and I guess lawfully would help the natural wine movement?
It might do, but I think I love natural wines because when I first tasted them, going back to I first tasted some natural wines and I was going, oh my word, these taste like amazing. There's almost like this elegance and harmony that normally you'd age classic wines for 20 years to get this sort of elegance and harmony. But suddenly you're getting this elegance and harmony in these wines, and this detail and these beguiling flavors in a young wine. And so
does natural wine age? How can you
we're jumping around a bit here. That's a good question.
Well, you just brought up
what? I think my answer would be
question.
Yeah. Well, I think, why do you age wine? And the answer is because you want to get these characters that come with age. Some wines
the
just
evolution
survive,
of character, right?
But some wines actually develop in a really interesting way in the cellar. But it's very few wines that age well. We're talking about a tiny
bracket of wines.
But you know what? Well, a lot of wine these days is like, tastes so good young. It's like, why would you age it?
Fair enough.
And I think with natural wine, the thing that appeals to me about natural wine is when I open a natural wine, it's good to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like technically you might be able to age it, but because they haven't had much added, and I would say that I'm going back to not adding anything. So the only thing you can really add to natural wine and call it natural wine is a little bit of sulfur dioxide at the end of the winemaking process.
Bit.
Yeah, a teeny bit. Just means that when you ship it across from France to America or New Zealand to England, that it survives the journey. Yeah, because that's the issue. These wines are a little bit fragile. So some people add none at all. There are no sulfites at all. Some will add just a little bit at the end.
I'm just going to jump back to a question that James Milton asked us here. Can you make natural wine from conventionally grown grapes?
I don't think you can. I think some people do.
Just give us a little bit of an overview. What is conventionally grown grapes, and why could we not make natural wine from conventionally grown grapes?
Right. So this is a big issue in viticulture, is the fact that since the mid-19th century, when two different fungal diseases and phylloxera hit in France, they're American diseases. Basically, so American diseases came over, and the Eurasian vine, Vitis vinifera, which is all the grape varieties we know and love, didn't evolve with these pests. And so since then, if you want to make wine grapes, you want to grow wine grapes worldwide, basically, except for a very few places, you've got to spray your vines quite a bit. And it's not that sustainable. You still have to, but the main thing is that if you're going to, conventional viticulture has a very different way of looking at a vineyard than what I would say organics or biodynamics. So conventional viticulture, you look at the vineyard, you see the crop plants. It's the old-fashioned view of growing things. You see this crop plant, and you think of the soil as just an inert medium to grow the crop plant in. When you're doing organics or biodynamics properly, what you're seeing is an agro-ecosystem. So you're thinking about all the organisms living together in that vineyard, and especially the stuff under your feet. So, you know, I think James Milton said once very memorably, we're standing on the rooftop of another kingdom.
Of another man's kingdom.
So it's like the idea is there's so much going under the soil. So if you really think about the vineyard, then you're not just farming vines, you're farming soils, because there's massive interactions going on under the soil, under the So we have to start changing our viewpoint to see the vineyard as this agro-ecosystem with checks and balances that are natural, from all different things growing in it. So you can't really use herbicides, and most vineyards in the world will, even if they start growing cover crops in the middle of the rows, under the vines they use herbicides, and that's really, really bad. Really bad.
And not very natural. Can we pour some Sauvignon in our glass? Because I know a few people with us this evening have some New Zealand Sauvignon in our glass. And I know time is cracking on a bit here because Jamie Goode just is like this. I want to pick your brain about New Zealand Sauvignon. I've got quite a few questions that we've pre-prepared for you. Obviously we've traveled to New Zealand on many occasions, and you and I both have a strong affiliation with this magical grape, which is New Zealand's rock star. But in your head, what makes New Zealand, before we start talking about chemicals and compounds and everything else, what makes New Zealand's Sauvignon so distinctive? Well,
it's just this, and I'd say I'd tie that down to Marlborough as well, especially the main region. Well, the facts speak for themselves. There weren't any vines planted in Marlborough until 1973. This didn't exist as a region. Now there's 27,000 hectares there, of which there are more than 20,000 hectares of Sauvignon Blanc. There's a reason for this. The essential New Zealandness of Kiwi Sauvignon, because it's. I remember the first time I tried a Marlborough Sauvignon. I was going, holy shit, what is this? This is like nothing I've ever encountered before. This is like so distinctive. And I think that was the reaction of most people the first time they tried a New Zealand.
The world
goes, holy shit, this country is like, previously it never really made any wines that, you'd take note of before. And it's true.
We made some good Muller too, yeah.
Well, actually, I quite like Muller. I wish there was some Muller left in Marlborough until 1990. In 1990, there was still more Muller Turgau in Marlborough than Sauvignon Blanc.
In 1990.
Now it's disappeared.
I mean, that was a few years ago. Let's not forget that.
That's quite recently. It's quite recent, 1990. It's like, showing my age.
Well, when you look at it on the scale of like the evolution of New Zealand wine and how far it's come since 1990, I think it's a long time ago. But in old world years.
But no, just the thing is that suddenly, when Marlborough Sauvignon got discovered, and I think it was the mid-80s when Cloudy Bay started off and hunters were sending wines to London. This was before I was drinking wine, so it's like I wasn't on the ground when this happened, but from what I hear, it's like everyone was amazed. And so suddenly you've got, from nothing at all, you've got this export-driven industry that's giving the world something that's never had before. And actually, if you think about it, before Marlborough Sauvignon became popular, people had never heard of Sauvignon Blanc, because in France, in the main regions where it originated, in the Loire Valley, Puy-Fumé, Sancerre, those areas, it wasn't labeled as Sauvignon Blanc.
No, I know. And so, when we talk about
suddenly, you invented Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah. And, quite often we host tastings at specialist cellars, and when we tell consumers that Sancerre is Sauvignon Blanc, everyone's highly confused. Although very, very different styles, still very much the same grape. So, I think New Zealand did a stonkingly good job of creating something that the world kind of stood up and looked at immediately. But they managed to sustain quality and reputation throughout this evolution as well, which is something that I think no other, well, you can contradict me on this, but no other wine or style has managed to quite convey around the world. Do you think any other wine has managed to have that type of reputation for that long, Jamie?
No, I think that the thing that's really helped it build this reputation is the consistency. And the fact that even if you, because basically it's a very pure vineyard wine in the sense that the winemaking is quite simple. So you just machine harvest your crop, you send it to the winery, you put it through a press, you do some very simple winemaking things, and very soon the wine is fermenting.
Some simple winemaking things.
So simple winemaking things, and it's like very soon you've got the thing fermenting, and it's stainless steel. It's not aged in oak. Well,
it's very quick. For winemaking, it's very fast, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't go into barrel.
So what you're capturing the essence of what happens in the vineyard, and it's such a special place. That even though there have been some cowboys out there, you know, who are just trying to make loads of money, cutting some corners and everything, the wine's still quite good, you know.
Cutting some corners and something. Anyway, let's have you taste our new press Sauvignon Blanc. So I know I always bang on about this one, and tonight was a special night because I got Jamie to taste this. This is a collaboration with myself and Ben Glover from Zephyr Wines in Marlborough. So a very, very classic style Marlborough Sauvignon. It's 100% stainless steel, lots of kind of ripe gooseberry flavors. It's not overly savory. Like sometimes you'll find the arbitrary styles tend to be more kind of cut grass, asparagus, cat's wee, some kind of terms that are usually thrown around. This is more kind of tropical and distinctive in that way, but still retaining that wonderful kind of fresh acidity that we see in Marlborough Sauvignon. And that comes down to the terroir and the region. Obviously, the proximity to ocean for New Zealand is a wonderful attribute, and one that we love very much, because that wonderful cool breeze manages to retain all that wonderful natural acidity that we see in wines from New Zealand. But I'd like Jamie to give us a view on this Sauvignon.
So I tried this a little bit earlier. You know what? I'm really impressed. Super impressed. I was going, because like, I know you, right? That's like your friend. I was going, please let us be good. Please let us be good. God, please let us be really nice.
That would have been
shit. Like, yeah, it's really good. And what I like about it, right? So this is 2019 vintage, which is, they had two bad vintages and then this vintage. And it was a warm, dry vintage. And I think some of the wines I tried from 19 have been really nice, but they've lacked some of that Marlborough-ness because they've not been zippy and zesty and explosively aromatic. And this, I think, is just benchmark. If you want to know what Marlborough Sauvignon tastes like, good Marlborough Sauvignon, this is a great example.
Thanks,
so what
Jamie.
I love about it is the aromatics. So I like this. There's that grapefruit and slightly tropical passion fruit character. There's also this lovely green. It's like a tomato leaf green. You know when you rub a tomato leaf, that sort of green.
Yeah.
So I know they normally associate with our terry, but it's like, yes, and it's integrated really well with the fruitiness in the wine. So it's not like sticking out. It's just adding a nice foil to the other flavors. So what you've got is all these flavors cutting in and out, and then blending together beautifully. And I like.
Yeah, there's a synchronicity to the flavors, though, right? It's not very one or the other. It kind of blends together with a synchronicity, which is why I truly love this Sauvignon. And you know, I've had to live with Sauvignon for every day of my life for the last 10 years, and as much as I love it, sometimes we have many examples in front of us. So to find one that's more restrained and more kind of classically driven is very much a style I'm turning back to. But we had a question, I think, from Mark. I lost it. Jamie, any opinion on barrel fermented Savvy, such those from Greystones and Waipara? Yeah.
So, you see, I'm kind of like, with Marlborough Sauvignon, it's so successful and so good. It's almost like you have to be really careful that you don't confuse consumers by having something that says Marlborough Sauvignon on it that tastes nothing like that. So in some ways, you need to distinguish. If you're going to make a wine in that style, you need to make sure it's clear to people who are drinking it that they're not going to get this sort of wine. Having said that, when I was in New Zealand last, when was it? It was a year ago. It was a year and a bit ago. February. Yeah, you were there, weren't you?
I was there. Yeah, we stayed together for many nights.
Yes. Yeah, that was funny. Brooksy as well, and Brooksy. That was fun.
Let's not get into that now.
Yeah. So No, what I really really appreciated was tasting lots of those sort of alternative Sauvignons that have maybe been barrel fermented, maybe they've been cropped low or hand picked, or from different sites, you know, and then given a very different winemaking treatment. And what those created were actually really age-worthy wines, I thought. And I tasted some older ones, and I was thinking, these are beautiful wines. So New Zealand Sauvignon can do that sort of style where you age it. Sauvignon, even some of the unoaked Sauvignons like this, some of them can age quite nicely.
Well, we saw that firsthand at the Sauvignon Blanc conference last year, where we were tasting Sauvignons that were 10 years old, weren't we? And still managing to retain that wonderful freshness and brightness. It was incredible. I was so surprised because I never anticipated Sauvignon like that being approachable, because as we have sometimes seen, they turn very vegetal and sometimes not very nice. So it was nice to see some examples really holding their own. But I wanted to, because I know we're just running through time here because we're having such a great time, talk about that infamous word methoxypyrazine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So methoxypyrazine.
Methoxypyrazine.
So it's with many varieties, they have what's called, compounds that define that variety. And I think for Sauvignon, methoxypyrazine is one of those. So it's a group of compounds that are formed in grapes, and they're very high levels in unripe grapes. And as the grapes ripen, the levels go down. But in Sauvignon Blanc, the levels, when they're harvested, the levels are still reasonably high. So part of the character of New Zealand Sauvignon is derived from these green tasting compounds. They taste like green. So if you want to taste methoxypyrazine, go and get a green pepper, cut it up and taste it. And that greenness is from methoxypyrazine.
And so very, very evident in New Zealand Sauvignon.
Yeah, and so that greenness is part of the signature of New Zealand Sauvignon. On its own, it's unpleasant. But when it's in the context of other elements to Sauvignon, it can work really well. If you want to have a methoxypyrazine wine, you just pick the grapes really early while they're unripe. And all you have is methoxypyrazine.
So just for some perspective, anywhere else in the world that produces Sauvignon with the same levels of methoxypyrazine, or is that something that's specifically related to terroir and region?
Well, actually, as I said, everywhere in the world produces grapes with methoxypyrazines. It's just that most places, when you harvest the grapes, the methoxypyrazines are at very low levels. But interestingly,
so
with the Bordeaux grape varieties, the red grape varieties from Bordeaux, so Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, methoxypyrazine is part of their signature. So it manifests itself in this slight greenness around the edges. And it can be really attractive as a framing. So if you go and buy a supermarket Bordeaux, what you'll taste some green notes in there, in the mix along with the red fruits and the black fruits. Yeah. And that's the methoxypyrazine. So in those grapes, it works quite well. In some contexts, it's unpleasant. So it's just a question of when the grapes are picked.
Right, I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Thoughts on Quartz Sauvignon from Tilania? Great with age. Any comments in regards to that?
So
do you know what? Thoughts on Quartz Sauvignon from Tilania?
I haven't tried that wine. I haven't tried that wine recently. No.
Okay. Another comment. There's cracking diversity in New Zealand, with Neudorf making great Albarino. What do you think is next? That was one of my questions. You can't steal my questions. What is next, Jamie, for New Zealand? What do you think's going to happen in the next few years?
I think Sauvignon's still going to be a key theme. It just does so well, and we shouldn't knock it. Often the wine trade, people get a bit snooty about Sauvignon, but everyone loves it. I love it still.
Yes,
it's great. You don't want to drink it every day, only just Sauvignon. I went to a Sauvignon Blanc conference in Austria once, and every meal, every event, you were drinking Sauvignon, and it's like 3 days of just Sauvignon. At the end, it was like if someone had walked in with a bottle of red wine, they'd have had their arm ripped off. So but Sauvignon's important. I think, so the next thing, so Albarino's done really well, actually. Albarino's a cracking great variety. I think it's fantastic, and it's adapted well to New Zealand. And in New Zealand, what you find with grape varieties when they're transplanted there is often it's like the volume and precision knob has been turned up to 11. So there's almost like a brightness, a super brightness to all the wines. It's like,
when I describe it, I describe it as a personality rather than a knob.
Right, I'm not going to follow that one up at all. Right. So Albarino's doing really well. Interestingly, Gruner Veltliner has not done as well. I have to be honest. Gruner was seen as being a big hope for New Zealand, but I've been so disappointed by so many New Zealand Gruner Veltliners. I think
yes, we have, haven't we?
I want to love it. I want to love it, but I find it hard to love. You know,
it's hard to love. One other than Newdorf for New Zealand Albarino, who else is growing and producing Albarino?
Loads of people. I can't remember their names right now.
Oh,
seriously, I did an article on.
Maybe.
I did an article on loads. There's about 6 in the article.
We've got a question here about Sauvignon Gris. I've been enjoying Sauvignon Gris recently, including Anna's Way Sauvignon Gris from Nelson. What is the relationship to Sauvignon Blanc?
So it's the same variety. It's just it's got a slight pink grey colour to the grapes. There's a bit of pigmentation in the skins, and so I guess it'd be like Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris, and Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris. So it's a kind of colour mutation of Sauvignon Blanc, but interestingly, it produces wines that taste quite different. They're just rounder and richer. It's really interesting. I've had a few. I know that Brancott have got quite a bit of it planted. That's the only one I can think of at the moment.
Villa Maria as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting variety. I think it can do some really nice things. Other varieties, obviously Chardonnay is strong in New Zealand. I think Chardonnay needs to become better known. New Zealand Chardonnay is amazing.
I think so too. I'm on a bit of a New Zealand Chardonnay pilgrimage at the moment to make sure more people can bring it over and understand it and drink it, because I think as much as I love Sauvignon, Chardonnay's not getting the airtime that it needs because it's sexy as, isn't it?
And I think Chardonnay, so I was at a really fancy wine tasting with like the super high-end people in the wine trade. And it was organised by Far Vintners, which is a knobby, posh, sort of like high-end, wanky.
We love Far.
We love Far, but it's like it's for wine trade people, you know, wah wah wah. And so the tasting was like top white Burgundies with the Cumulé River Chardonnays in the mix, blind.
Yeah.
And those Cumulé wines held their own, man. They were like
they did, didn't they?
Top.
Didn't they beat every? No, I wasn't there, but I heard that Kumu came trumps on every flight except for one where it came first equal.
I think that's true, but it's like, even if I can't remember exactly, but I think that rings true. Yeah.
Do you think that's true? A very quick question: does Sauvignon Gris lack the methoxypyrazine level?
I think that's a good question. Do you know what I'm thinking? It's got a bit of colour on the skins. Maybe it gets warmer. Because if you've got a bit more colour, then you're going to get warmer. And so it could be that the grapes get warmer, and because of that, they end up a bit riper.
Which therefore the methoxypyrazine level
less
goes
methoxypyrazines.
down.
Yeah.
Right, let's try some New Press Rosé, Mr. Goode. And you can give me your verdict on this wonderful rosé from Mr. Ben Glover in Marlborough. So as I find New Zealand rosé a bit tricky up here because everyone loves Provence. And New Zealand has the ability to produce almost Beaujolais styles in terms of colour. Rosés up here, and we wanted to create something that was a little bit lighter. Obviously, we'd never be able to contend with Provence in any way, shape or form, but we wanted to create something that was a nod to Provence, hence the lighter color and structure, if you will, with this rosé. So what are your thoughts?
I like the color, really attractive.
Yes,
that's
very
it. No, not it.
That's all I like. Yeah, that's all he likes, folks. He only likes the color.
What I like is it's kind of like it's got a zesty precision to it. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's got good acid. It's zesty. It's got like a bit of cranberry and watermelon as well. To get watermelon here, I love that.
Yeah, Now that you say it, funny that, isn't it? Remember, wine is very subjective.
It's very refreshing. It's very refreshing, and pretty.
Jane Parkinson saying
like,
orcs. Hi, Jane.
Orcs.
Jane Parkinson saying orcs. I'm assuming, but that's to the comment that you only like the colour. But anyway.
Yeah.
Jamie, you've got a lot of experience in other New World countries, don't you? Be it by travelling and judging and tasting and writing. Are there any similarities, do you think, with any New Zealand wine regions to any other New World wine regions? Or do you think New Zealand is a very much a standalone nation in terms of regionality?
I find New Zealand to be quite unique, actually. I'm trying to think about where else I go. Look, I go to Canada a lot. Canada's so different. The growing season's so different. In different
what about
parts
South
of
Africa?
Canada's very different. South Africa's much warmer than New Zealand. Much warmer climate.
And so
maybe some cooler parts in Australia would be a parallel. I guess Tasmania is pretty cool.
Yeah, we've had many winemakers on over the last few weeks, and Steve Flamstead, for instance, from Giant Steps, was raving about Tasmania and some wineries from Tassie that we should be digging out and trying. And I know I haven't tried many wines from Tasmania, but I'm certainly looking them up and trying to track them down to understand the similarities and to see the wines that are being produced down there. Do you have any favorite producers from Australia that you want to share with us before you share your favorite New Zealand producers with us?
Australia, it's just like so hard because I'm going to miss people out. But I'm a big fan of a Coat of Barrels, man, love those wines.
I know, they're amazing. I don't tell them anymore, sadly.
BK Wines. Do you have BK Wines?
Yeah, they're amazing as well. And the awesome. Skin and Bones wines. I've got a question from Hannah. We talk about the struck match character of Australian Chardonnay currently. Is there an equivalent way to describe New Zealand Chard?
Right, so that struck match refers to a way of making the wine where the yeasts are being stressed a little bit. And so what they do is they pump out compounds that we call volatile sulfur compounds. So this is kind of a bit geeky. But the right sort of volatile sulfur compounds, also known in the trade as reduction, can give this lovely struck match mineral character, which frames the wine beautifully. So lots of winemakers are now playing with this. So Puma River, they're very clever at this. So they just get a little bit of this reductive struck match flinty mineral character in their wines as well. So a lot of people in New Zealand are doing the same thing, and it's more about winemaking technique, a clever winemaking to just get a little bit of that. But you're flirting with danger when you do this. So it takes a lot of courage to be able to get this character.
Because if you go too far, then you get that hugely reductive note to the wine, and it's not very tasty to drink, is it?
Yeah.
So you're quite averse to understanding faults in wine as well, aren't you?
Well, what I think is we need to think carefully about describing something as a fault.
Why is that?
Because when there are some things there are some compounds which at the wrong level in the wrong wine can be distinguished as a fault. But at the right level can enhance the beauty of a wine. It's the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi. The idea of small flaws can help to bring out the beauty.
And you've written a book about flaws, haven't you?
Yeah, it's called Flawless.
Oh, funny that. Where can you buy that book?
I don't know. Anywhere on the internet.
It's sold out. It's sold out.
It's like yeah, buy it if you want to read about. It's kind of like it's kind of geeky, but one of the main reasons I wrote that is because I think people have been trained to, if you're a winemaker, your job is to spot the first signs of trouble in a wine. So you're looking for the first signs of these fault compounds. But then the danger is you become a false policeman. So I've judged wines with winemakers before, and often they're like, a really, really cracking wine gets pushed back because oh, I think it's a little bit grubby. Oh, there's something here I don't like. And it's like, dudes, this is a really amazing wine. No pushback. And the wine that wins is like some boring commercial wine that is just very safe. And I think sometimes we want a little bit of danger in our wines. We want these little edges sometimes to bring out the beauty.
We need to complement the edge sometimes, don't we, Jamie?
Yes.
Don't we? Hey, before we finish up, and I say thank you very much for talking to us about lots and lots of different things. I've got one more question, and then I've got a question for you from me. Victoria and Mark are asking, how do you stress the yeast? Is it heat or a lower temperature?
So basically, one of the key ways is if they run out of nutrients. So the yeast, if they run out of nutrients,
they run out of
the
things
yeast
to
go,
eat.
yeah, and then the pathways that do things end up doing different things, which cause these sulfides to accumulate. But
To be under stress.
Rapid temperature changes can cause stress as well.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to
It's a bit
handle
like
these
my
guys.
sourdough starter, isn't it?
You've been making sourdough?
Yeah, man.
Oh, I've never tried it. I'd love to try it. How's your starter? Is it good?
Do you know what? The starter is the yeast is causing me stress.
Have you had some failures yet?
I don't want to talk about that. Thank you. There's no failures in this house. And my final question for you, Mr. Goode, is there's two actually. Over your witnessing the last kind of 10 years of New Zealand going from, or 20 years, shall we say, zero to hero, what do you think was your biggest learning in terms of New Zealand? And my second question for the evening is, who's your producer to watch from New Zealand?
Oh, man, this is such a difficult question, but so good. Such a good question as well. So the first question, I think, you know what? I think the key thing is being on the ground and going to the regions and seeing people farming well and doing great things. And especially a really big impression was left on me by Central Otago and seeing what's going on there. The scale is a little smaller, and there's so many.
They're a tight
heroes.
Community in Central, aren't they?
Yeah. So I really, really love what's going on there. Producer to watch, you know what? It's such an impossibly hard question because I know so many people. There's so many good people doing great things there. I would probably say, I don't know, but you mentioned Black Estate earlier. I love what they're doing, you know, because
we love Black Estate.
They're playing with danger a little bit, you know, and I love that. They're courageous. They're farming well. They've got beautiful terroirs, and they're really good. And the other one I want to mention from Marlborough, Corofin.
Oh yeah,
Mike Patterson. Mike's a dude, and he's making some beautiful wines. And what he's doing is he's finding really interesting vineyard sites in Marlborough, because I think sometimes the small boutique-y side of things gets forgotten in Marlborough, and the vineyard focus gets forgotten. But this is about finding really well-farmed sites, interesting terroirs, and making cool wines.
And he's making a barrel-fermented Sauvignon too, isn't he?
Yeah.
So lots of the smaller guys are starting to produce these kind of barrel-fermented wild-style
Sauvignons. One more. I have to say, Theo Coles, Hermit Ram.
I thought you were going to say Leo in the beginning. And then you
I know, my brain's just like, no, Theo is just such a legend, and he's making some of the most exciting wines in New Zealand at the moment, from WiFi as well. Yeah.
And to give my neighbours a shout out, Salon in Brixton is selling his beautiful wines. So sadly, they're not on specialist sellers at the moment, but you can get them from our neighbour at Salon. So go and buy them when you can. But in the meantime, you can buy these two beauties.
They are beauties. They're really good. Well done, Mel. They're really cool.
Thank you very much. It wasn't up to me. It was really up to Ben Glover, but I had a hand in telling him what to do, which I'm relatively good at. So on that lovely note, I'm going to say thank you very much, Mr. Goode. Thank you for sharing your world with us. Thank you for talking us through natural wine. And thank you for tasting our wines. And we shall see you, hopefully, in the not too distant future at Brixton. In Brixton.
See you soon. Yeah.
With us. And thanks, everyone. Nice to see you, Jane Parkinson.